My name is Lauren. I never thought I would tell this story. Not because I am ashamed, but because I still cannot fully believe it happened to me. I used to think betrayal was something that happened to other people. People in movies, in podcasts, in whispered office gossip, but not in my quiet, predictable marriage. And yet, here I am, sitting in the same kitchen where everything began, telling you how my husband inherited $33 million dollars and told me I was useless. The reason I am sharing this now is simple. People think money changes circumstances. It does not. It changes people. Or maybe it only unmasks who they truly were all along. It started on a Monday morning that looked like any other. The sunlight was soft, the coffee smelled strong, and the house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock above the stove. I remember adjusting my cardigan, thinking about grocery lists and emails I needed to send. Then he walked in, Ethan, my husband of 11 years. His tie was crooked, his smile tighter than usual. He held his phone like it was made of gold. "Lauren," he said, voice calm, too calm. "Dad's lawyer just called." I looked up from my mug. "Everything okay?" He nodded slowly, still staring at the screen. "More than okay. He left it all to me. 33 million. He said it like he was reading the weather forecast. I blinked, waiting for a grin, a laugh, something human. Instead, he placed his phone down on the table and exhaled. "Do you know what that means?" I smiled weakly. "That we can finally pay off the mortgage?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes moved past me toward the window, where the sun cut through the blinds in perfect stripes across the countertop. "It means," he said finally, "I don't need to pretend anymore." Then came the words that still echo in my chest. "You're useless now, Lauren. Get out of my house." At first, I thought he was joking, the way people joke badly when they don't know how to celebrate. But the tone in his voice wasn't teasing, it was surgical, cold, detached. I laughed, softly, trying to diffuse whatever strange energy filled the room. "That's not funny." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "I'm serious. You don't contribute anything anymore. You were support when I needed support. Now I don't." The words hit me like a slap that left no mark. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hands trembling as I tried to hold on to something, anything that made sense. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but all that came out was a whisper. "After everything we've been through?" He shrugged. "People change, Lauren. Circumstances change. You'll be fine." Fine, that word again. It always meant the opposite. Fine was what he said after every argument we never resolved, after every silence that lasted days. Fine was his way of closing a door without saying goodbye. I stood there, staring at him, feeling the air grow heavy between us. My mind flooded with fragments of our years together. The nights I stayed up editing his business proposals, the weekends I canceled plans to support him at networking events, the nights I held him after his father's health scares. I had built my life around partnership, only to realize it was a one-way construction site. The strange thing about heartbreak is how quiet it can be. There was no screaming, no thrown plates, no storm of accusations, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the clink of his coffee spoon as he stirred like nothing had happened. My body went cold, but my voice, when it finally came, was steady. "If you want me gone, I'll go." He nodded once, as if approving a business transaction. "Good. You have until noon." I turned toward the stairs, every step feeling like it carried a piece of me away. I packed a single suitcase, some clothes, my passport, a few photos that mattered only to me. I left the wedding ring on the dresser. By the time I came back down, he was on a call, laughing. "Yeah, she's leaving," he said to whoever was on the other end. "I told you she wouldn't make this difficult." That laugh broke something inside me. Not the sound itself, but the ease of it. Like he had practiced it. Like I had been erased already. I walked out without looking back. But this isn't a story about a woman crying on the side of the road. It's about what happens next. About how silence can be louder than shouting, and how one phone call can turn a loss into justice. I checked into a small hotel near downtown, sat on the bed, and stared at my phone for a long time. Then I did the one thing Ethan never expected. I called my lawyer, a woman named Marissa who had handled my previous job contract years ago. When she picked up, her voice was brisk, professional. "Lauren, it's been a while. How are you?" I almost said fine. Instead, I told her the truth. "My husband just threw me out. He inherited $33 million, and he says I'm useless. There was a pause on the other end. Then her tone changed. Did you sign a prenup? Yes, but I added an amendment 5 years ago when we refinanced the house. She exhaled softly. Good. Don't worry, Lauren. He's about to learn what useless really means. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the city lights flicker through the blinds and listened to the hum of passing cars. The air conditioning rattled every few minutes. My mind replayed every detail of that morning, every cruel word, every moment I had dismissed as stress or exhaustion. By dawn, I felt hollow, but strangely calm. When you have nothing left to lose, calm feels like power. At 8 a.m., I met Marissa at her office. She wore a navy suit and the kind of expression that made people sit straighter. I told her everything, every payment I had made, every loan I had helped Ethan secure, every document that bore both our names. She listened, took notes, and finally smiled. Lauren, he may have inherited millions, but he forgot one thing. Marriage is also a contract. That was the first moment I let myself breathe. Because now, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just the woman who got left behind. I was the woman preparing for what came next. And 24 hours later, Ethan would discover that the word useless had a whole new meaning. If part one was the breaking, part two was the quiet aftershocks, the space where disbelief turns into cold clarity. I woke up the next morning in that hotel room with the kind of stillness that only follows chaos. The sheets were stiff, the air smelled faintly of bleach, and for a long moment, I just stared at the ceiling trying to remember whose life I was living. Then I saw the small suitcase on the floor and the hotel key card on the nightstand. Right, mine. This was my life now. I got dressed, brushed my hair, and watched the reflection of a woman I barely recognized. My face looked calm, but my eyes had that faraway look of someone measuring what had been taken from her and realizing it might not be a loss after all. Marissa called right as I was pouring bad hotel coffee into a paper cup. Lauren, I went through your file, she said. You did everything right. You documented payments, you co-signed loans, you even added a contribution clause in the refinance paperwork. That's gold. I didn't speak at first. I just watched steam rise from my cup and tried to process how something so fragile as a clause could suddenly mean everything. What happens now? I asked finally. We build a case, she said. He used your financial stability as leverage to grow his own assets. Under community property law, those funds count as marital contributions. We'll freeze transfers until we verify the sources. I almost smiled, not because I wanted revenge, but because for the first time in years, someone was using the word we and actually meaning it. I left the hotel and drove to a small diner I used to love when Ethan and I first started dating. The same red booths, the same smell of maple syrup and burnt toast. It was surreal being there alone. I remembered how he'd once said the pancakes tasted like sundaes. Back then, we didn't have much, just two people building something brick by brick. Somewhere along the way, he started thinking he built it alone. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl like smoke, and tried to trace when the shift began. Maybe it was after his promotion 3 years ago, when he started buying expensive watches and saying things like, "You wouldn't understand business." Maybe it was when he stopped asking how my day was. Or maybe it was when I started defending him to people who saw the warning signs long before I did. Denial has a way of disguising itself as loyalty. That afternoon, I went to our old house, not to confront him, but to collect what was legally mine. Marissa had already filed a notice of pending litigation, which meant he couldn't move assets or destroy shared property. I half expected him to be gone, but his car was still in the driveway, gleaming like a trophy. I stood there for a long moment before ringing the bell. He opened the door wearing a new suit, the kind that practically whispered price tags. His eyes flicked to the envelope in my hand. "What's that?" he asked. "Notice from my attorney," I said evenly. "You'll want to read it." He smirked. "You really called a lawyer?" "I did," I said, meeting his eyes. "You told me I was useless. I just wanted to make sure that's legally accurate." His smile faltered for the first time. It was small, but it was there, the tiniest crack in his confidence. He took the papers and shut the door without another word. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange peace settle over me. For years, I had been the one chasing calm. Now, I was the storm. That night, Marissa emailed a list of assets we could trace: the joint savings account I'd filled when he was between jobs, the investment property under both our names, even the trust his father had set up years ago. He may try to move funds offshore, she warned. Don't worry, we'll get a temporary injunction. I stared at the numbers on the screen. The cold math of 10 years of shared life turned into decimals and zeros. It wasn't just money. It was proof of everything I had poured into him, line by line. Around midnight, I drove to the ocean. It was something I hadn't done in years. The tide was low, the sky wide open, and the waves made that rhythmic sound that always felt like breathing. I sat on the hood of my car, the salt wind cutting through the last traces of fear. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who believed partnership meant sacrifice, who equated silence with strength. And I realized that woman no longer existed. I wasn't broken. I was awake. The next morning, Marissa called again. He's already contacted my office, she said. Apparently, he's upset you involved legal counsel. I laughed quietly. He didn't seem upset when he threw me out. Well, she said, he's about to be. The court date is set for Friday. I could almost hear the pages turning in her binder. Lauren, he underestimated you. That's his biggest mistake. After the call, I stood by the hotel window, watching sunlight spill over the skyline. Everything felt sharper. The light, the air, even the way my heart beat. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was moving forward with intent. People talk about justice like it's loud, like it comes with gavel strikes and grand speeches. But real justice, the kind that matters, is quiet. It's the sound of a woman walking away without flinching. Later that day, I packed my things and checked out of the hotel. The clerk handed me the receipt, smiled, and said, "Heading home?" I paused, then answered, "Something like that." I drove away without looking back, because home wasn't a place anymore. It was whoever I became next. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and cold air. I had never been inside one before that week, and yet, walking through those glass doors felt like stepping into a second life. Marissa was already there, crisp and composed as always, a stack of documents in her hand. "Remember," she said softly, "you don't have to say much today. Just stay calm." I nodded, but inside, calm was the last thing I felt. I was standing in front of the place where everything I had lived through, the betrayal, the silence, the humiliation, was about to turn into evidence. When Ethan arrived, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked polished, confident, even charming, shaking hands with his attorney like this was just another business meeting. But there was something in his eyes when he finally glanced my way. It wasn't regret. It was calculation. He leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something, his lips barely moving. I wondered what he was telling him. Maybe that I was predictable. Maybe that I would fold before this was over. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The hearing started, and Marissa did exactly what she said she would. She built a wall of facts around me, brick by careful brick. Every loan I had signed for him, every dollar I had transferred, every late-night email I had sent trying to save his failing business, it was all there, documented and dated. Ethan's lawyer tried to interrupt, arguing that the inheritance was separate property. Marissa's tone stayed even. "That's correct," she said, "but Mr. Sanders used joint marital funds to cover legal fees and pre-estate debts. By law, that intertwines the assets." Watching her work was like watching someone conduct an orchestra. Calm, deliberate, precise. Ethan tried to look unfazed, but the slight twitch in his jaw gave him away. For years, I had been the quiet one in the background, but now the quiet belonged to him. When it was over, the judge set a formal hearing for the following week and issued a temporary freeze on all asset transfers. Ethan walked past me without a word, the smell of his cologne lingering like a memory I didn't want. Outside, the wind was sharp and clean. Marissa touched my shoulder gently. "You did great," she said. I wanted to believe her, but my chest felt heavy. "It doesn't feel great," I admitted. "It feels empty." She smiled faintly. "That's normal. You're used to carrying the weight. Now you're just letting it go." I drove home, well, to the small apartment I was renting now, and for the first time I let myself cry. Not the kind of crying that comes from sadness, but the kind that comes from release. 10 years of being careful, polite, patient, all of it washed away in those quiet tears. Then, as I wiped my face, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think you've won something?" No name, but I didn't need one. Ethan had never been subtle. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, tempted to respond, but I stopped. That was what he wanted, to pull me back into his chaos. Instead, I turned off the phone and opened my laptop. Marissa had told me to start gathering more evidence, emails, receipts, anything that proved our shared investments. I spent hours digging through folders, files, even old cloud accounts I hadn't opened in years. The deeper I went, the more I found. Transfers he made using my credentials, statements he never showed me, a hidden account in both our names linked to one of his shell companies. I stared at the numbers, my pulse racing. He wasn't just careless, he was reckless. Every trace of arrogance was now turning into his undoing. I sent everything to Marissa with a brief message. Found more. You'll want to see this. Her reply came 10 minutes later. Lauren, this changes everything. The next few days blurred into a pattern of preparation and discovery. Every morning began with coffee and court filings. Every night ended with exhaustion and a strange, steady hope. The day before the hearing, Marissa called. He offered a settlement, she said. $500,000. I laughed, a dry sound that didn't even feel like mine. He thinks this is about money. Exactly, she said. That's why we're not taking it. You're not just proving your worth, Lauren. You're rewriting the record. The following morning, I dressed in a simple navy dress and pulled my hair back. No jewelry, no distractions, just clarity. The courthouse was busier this time, buzzing with voices and footsteps echoing down the marble hallways. When Ethan saw me, his smirk returned, but it looked forced. I walked past him without slowing down. The hearing lasted nearly 3 hours. Marissa presented the new evidence, piece by piece, like a story told with precision and restraint. At one point, Ethan's attorney leaned over and whispered urgently. Ethan's face turned pale. The moment hung in the air like the pause before thunder. When the judge finally spoke, his words were measured but decisive. Based on the presented evidence, the court finds that Mrs. Sanders has demonstrated some substantial contribution to the marital estate. The motion to divide assets equitably is granted. Ethan's jaw tightened. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just breathed, deep, slow, certain. When we stepped outside, the sunlight felt different. Marissa turned to me, her tone lighter. Congratulations, it's done. Not yet, I said quietly, but it's beginning. That night, I went back to the ocean again. The tide was higher this time, waves crashing harder against the rocks. I thought about everything that had led me here. The love I gave, the trust I lost, the strength I found in the aftermath. For years, I had defined myself by how much I could endure. Now, I was learning how to stand in what I deserved. I picked up a small shell, cold and perfect in my palm, and let it fall back into the surf. The water rushed over my feet, cold and cleansing. I whispered into the wind, not as a wish, but as a promise. You can't erase me. And somewhere behind that sound, faint but certain, the world seemed to answer, you never were. The morning after the hearing, I woke up before sunrise. The city outside my apartment was still half asleep, the streetlights flickering against the quiet hum of dawn. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace, though it was fragile, like glass under fingertips. The papers were signed, the judgment declared, and Ethan could no longer touch what wasn't his. Still, peace didn't mean closure. It just meant the noise had stopped long enough for me to hear myself think. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the light crawl over the skyline. My phone buzzed on the table, a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Lauren, a voice said, smooth but strained. It was Ethan. I didn't speak, waiting. We need to talk, he said. Not through lawyers. Just you and me. I almost laughed. About what? You said I was useless, remember? He sighed. I didn't mean it like that. Everything just got out of hand. Let's meet. Lunch. My treat. I stared at the steam rising from my cup, weighing the impulse to hang up against the quiet satisfaction of hearing him try. 1 hour, I said finally. Public place. I chose a restaurant downtown, somewhere bright and crowded, where every sound overlapped with another. When I walked in, he was already there, dressed like he was about to close a deal. His smile was careful, his posture rehearsed. Lauren, he greeted, standing as if courtesy could erase everything. I sat without shaking his hand. You said you wanted to talk. So talk. He leaned forward, voice low. We don't have to make this ugly. You got your share. You can move on. I can move on. We can both walk away quietly. I met his eyes. I already have. His smile faltered. Don't be like this. Like what? Calm, rational, independent? I said, keeping my tone even. You told me I was nothing without you. Turns out that was projection. He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. You think this little court win makes you powerful? No, I said. It just makes me free. For a moment, the mask slipped. His eyes darkened with something sharp, anger or maybe disbelief that I wasn't folding. He straightened, collecting his composure. You'll regret this. You always do. I stood, gathering my purse. Not this time. When I left, my hands were steady. I could feel his stare follow me to the door, but it didn't matter. That conversation wasn't closure. It was confirmation. He was still trying to play a game I no longer belonged to. Outside, the air was cool, the sun too bright. I walked without direction, letting the city's rhythm swallow my thoughts. For years, I had built my life around his moods, his needs, his validation. Now, every step I took alone felt like reclaiming territory. That evening, Marissa called. He tried to contact you, didn't he? He did, I said. Lunch invitation, she sighed. That's typical. They always come back when control slips away. He's angry, I said quietly. Good, she replied. Anger means he's realizing he can't rewrite the story. We talked strategy for a while, final filings, enforcement orders, the mechanics of ending something cleanly. But even as she spoke, I realized the real battle wasn't legal anymore. It was internal. I needed to rebuild the parts of me that had gone quiet while living beside someone who made me smaller. The next week, I started volunteering at a community legal clinic. Nothing major at first, organizing files, answering phones, but the space felt alive. People came in scared, unsure, and left with direction. It reminded me of the person I used to be before Ethan's world became my orbit. One afternoon, a woman came in, hands shaking as she clutched a folder. Her story was too familiar. A controlling partner, finances tied up, the fear of starting over. When she finished talking, I said, "You're stronger than you think." I know because I thought I wasn't, and I was wrong. She smiled weakly, eyes glistening. How did you get through it? By not giving up when he wanted me to disappear, I said. By remembering that dignity is louder than money. After she left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the desk. For the first time, my pain had purpose. It wasn't just something I survived, it was something I could use. Later that evening, Marissa stopped by with paperwork. You've been busy, she said, glancing around the small office. Feels different seeing you here. It feels right, I admitted, like I'm finally standing somewhere that belongs to me. She smiled. You know, not every case ends cleanly, but yours, it closed with clarity. That's rare. I nodded, but a thought lingered. It's strange, I said softly. You think winning will feel like victory, but it really just feels quiet. Quiet is good, she said. It's peace without applause. That night I walked home through the city. The air smelled of rain, and neon reflections rippled on the pavement. I thought about how far I'd come from that morning when Ethan called me useless. Back then, I believed him. Now, the word didn't even fit. I wasn't useless. I had been used. There's a difference. In the following days, I began writing again. Nothing formal, just pages of thoughts, memories, small lessons. I wrote about power and silence, about how love without respect is just dependency in disguise. I wrote about women who rebuild quietly, without spectacle, and how strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, steady and unbroken. A month later, I received the final court confirmation in the mail. My share had been transferred. The house I once lived in was listed for sale. Ethan had left the city. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as closure. The next morning, I stood by the ocean again. The water was calm, the horizon pale gold under early sunlight. I let the wind move through my hair and breathed deeply, the kind of breath that fills every corner of the lungs. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone's apology or approval. I was simply alive, unbound. Justice hadn't come from anger. It had come from choosing myself when someone else didn't. As the tide touched my feet, I whispered, "This is mine now." And for the first time, the silence that answered wasn't empty. It was freedom. 2 months passed, and life began to feel like mine again. I woke up early, brewed my own coffee, and didn't flinch at the silence anymore. It was strange how quickly peace could become routine once you stopped expecting someone to ruin it. The legal clinic kept me busy, And I found comfort in small things: the rhythm of typing case notes, the hum of conversations, the weight of purpose returning to my days. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted again. I was reviewing a client file when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line froze me. Urgent inquiry, estate audit. It was from Ethan's former estate accountant. I hesitated before opening it. The message was brief but heavy. Miss Sanders, I'm contacting you regarding irregularities discovered during a post-transfer audit. You might want to be informed. Please call when convenient. My heart pounded. I hadn't thought about Ethan in weeks, and suddenly his name was back in my inbox like a ghost tapping on glass. I forwarded the message to Marissa, adding only 3 words. What's this about? Her reply came minutes later. Do not respond. I'll handle it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the rain against the window, memories colliding with questions. What kind of irregularities? Had he tried to move money illegally? Or was this just another attempt to pull me into his mess? The next morning, Marissa called. You need to come in, she said. Her tone was calm, but something in it made my stomach tighten. When I arrived, she closed the office door and set a folder on the desk. The audit found multiple hidden accounts, she said. Your husband, well, ex-husband, was funneling money through offshore holdings before the inheritance even cleared. That's embezzlement, Lauren. I blinked, trying to process. You mean before the inheritance? Exactly, she said. He used marital funds to mass transactions, likely for tax evasion. The authorities are investigating. My hands went cold. Am I involved? No, she said firmly. You're clear. The audit confirms your name was forged on one of the authorization documents, which strengthens your previous case. I exhaled slowly, relief mixed with disbelief. Ethan hadn't just been cruel. He had been reckless on a scale I never imagined. Marissa leaned back, studying me. This could turn into a criminal case. They may call you to testify. I nodded, my voice low. If they need me, I'll be there. That night, I sat by the window again, the city lights reflecting on the glass like tiny fires. It hit me how poetic it was. Ethan, who once called me useless, was now unraveling under the weight of his own lies. Still, I didn't feel joy. What I felt was something quieter, sharper. Justice wasn't always satisfying. Sometimes it was simply necessary. A week later, I was called to meet with investigators. They were polite, professional, asking detailed questions about timelines, signatures, transfers. I answered carefully, fact by fact, keeping emotion out of it. When it was over, one of them said, "You probably saved yourself a lot of trouble by leaving when you did." I smiled faintly. He saved me by showing me who he was. Afterward, I drove to the pier. The ocean had become my place of clarity, where noise dissolved into rhythm. I stood at the railing, the wind whipping through my hair, and realized how far I had come. I no longer needed to prove anything. To him, to the court, to anyone. I had built something unshakable, self-respect. A few days later, Marissa called again. They arrested him this morning, she said. Fraud, tax evasion, falsifying documents. It's all over the news. I didn't rush to check the headlines. I didn't need to see his face again. The story would spread, people would whisper, and maybe he'd finally understand the weight of every careless choice he made. Thank you, I told her, for everything. You did the hard part, Lauren, she said. You stood up. That night, I walked home under a sky that felt endless. The city glowed with its usual indifference, cars rushing by, neon signs blinking like heartbeat monitors. But somewhere beneath all that motion, I felt still. Not frozen, not empty, steady. The next morning, I stopped by the clinic early, bringing donuts for the team. It wasn't a celebration, not really, just a gesture that said life moves forward. The clients came in one after another, stories of loss, hope, survival. I listened, I helped, I smiled. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was steady, like breathing. Around noon, I stepped outside for air. Across the street, a man in a gray suit stood watching me. For a moment, my pulse quickened, but then he turned away, talking into a phone, and I realized it wasn't Ethan. My mind had learned to expect ghosts, but there were none left. That afternoon, Marissa texted me a single sentence. Case officially closed. I sat at my desk, staring at the message until the words blurred. Then I typed back, "It's over," and hit send. But it wasn't just over, it was reborn. Every version of me that had been quieted, doubted, or dismissed finally had space to breathe. That evening, I returned to the ocean one last time. The sunset was bold, bleeding orange into violet, and the waves rolled heavy and rhythmic. I stood barefoot in the sand, feeling the cool water curl around my ankles. This time there was no sorrow, no reflection, only gratitude. Not for what I lost, but for what I reclaimed. I whispered into the horizon, "Thank you for ending." The wind carried it away, soft and certain. Somewhere behind me, laughter drifted from a passing couple, ordinary and full of life. I smiled. My story had started with silence and ended with strength. Ethan's chapter had closed, but mine was still being written, page by page, choice by choice, in a voice that finally belonged only to me. A year later, the story that once defined me had become something I could talk about without my voice shaking. Time has a way of sanding down even the sharpest edges, turning pain into perspective. I had moved into a small house by the coast, nothing extravagant, but every inch of it was mine. The mornings were quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I'd wake up to the sound of waves against the shore, brew a pot of coffee, and sit on the porch watching the sunlight crawl across the water. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, stitched together by small choices to keep going. I often thought about how everything had started. With Ethan, with the inheritance, with that single cruel sentence that pushed me out of the life I thought was stable. But now, when his name crossed my mind, it no longer carried heat. It was just a word from another lifetime. He was serving time for financial crimes, his empire dismantled, his reputation reduced to a headline. I didn't celebrate that. Justice, I had learned, isn't about revenge. It's about release. It's the moment you stop looking back. At the clinic, I had taken on a new role, helping manage outreach programs for women starting over. Every story I heard felt like an echo of my own. Different details, same ache. Some came with nothing but a suitcase. Some with kids, debts, or bruises too deep to see. Yet all of them carried something powerful, the will to rebuild. I told them what I wish someone had told me. Strength doesn't mean you never fall apart. It means you learn how to gather yourself again. They listened. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they smiled. And slowly, piece by piece, I watched them begin again. One afternoon, as I locked up the office, Marissa stopped by. She looked at me with that same calm sharpness she'd had the first day we met. "You've changed," she said. I laughed. "You mean the hair?" "No," she smiled, "the way you walk, the way you take up space." I hadn't realized it, but she was right. I no longer apologized for existing. I no longer folded myself small to make someone else comfortable. After she left, I took the long road home by the cliffs. The ocean stretched endlessly beside me, vast and untamed, like a mirror for everything I had survived. The wind was strong, pushing against me, but it felt good to resist it. For years, I had lived bending to someone else's will. Now I stood straight, even when the world pushed back. That evening, I wrote in my journal, a habit I'd started during the chaos and never let go. I wrote about what I'd learned, not just from Ethan, but from myself. That love without respect is dependency. That silence isn't peace if it costs your voice. That letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I wrote about how pain doesn't define you, it refines you. And when you finally come through it, you don't shine in spite of the cracks, but because of them. Sometimes I still receive messages from people who've seen my story online. They say things like, "I'm where you were," or "How did you find the courage to leave?" I always answer the same way. It starts with one small choice, to believe you deserve better. That's how every story of survival begins. Not with a grand plan, but with a quiet decision that grows louder each day. On the anniversary of my freedom, the day I left that house for the last time, I walked to the ocean again. The sand was warm beneath my feet, and the air smelled like salt and possibility. I thought about how endings and beginnings often blur together, how sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what matters. I whispered into the wind, "Thank you for teaching me." The tide rolled in, gentle and endless. Standing there, I realized I wasn't the same woman who had once begged for someone else's approval. I was whole, not because life had been kind, but because I had survived it honestly. And maybe that's the real inheritance. Not money, not houses, not the things that can vanish overnight, but the courage to start again. So if you've listened this far, if you've walked through my story and seen pieces of yourself in it, remember this. You're not broken for being hurt. You're becoming for having healed. Don't let anyone convince you your worth depends on their validation. You define it every time you get up and keep moving. Because strength isn't built in comfort, it's forged in the moments when you refuse to stay small. If stories like this remind you that survival has beauty, stay with me. There are more stories to tell of loss, of resilience, of people who walked through fire and didn't just make it out, but built something better on the ashes. Subscribe not just to the channel, but to yourself, to your own voice, your own future, your own power. Because sometimes the most powerful story you'll ever hear is the one you finally allow yourself to live. Word count 808.